My friends, good morning. The worldwide energy crisis is escalating, and it's quickly becoming a worldwide food crisis with all the interruptions to food production and processing that are going on almost everywhere. So what I want to do today is make sure that while there is a ton going on in the world, and that's an understatement, it can be easy to get lost in analysis of each of these disparate things instead of stepping back and realizing that food production is taking huge hits right now. From China, where they are literally stopping some of their food processing plants, soybean crushing plants, in an effort just to keep the lights on. Again, to Europe, where the Dutch greenhouses, which are heated by natural gas, are being shut down. Netherlands being one of the number 2 in the world exporter by value of food. So China, of course, is huge production as well. Even in the UK, where they had natural gas prices rise, so they couldn't afford the fertilizer, which of course is going to impact yields next season. Also meaning they didn't have the CO2, so they've stopped the slaughter of their animals. You can read here, most of these are affecting smaller producers that are operating at 50% in some cases of their meat production. So we're having huge impacts to grains in China, to greenhouses in Netherlands, to meat in the UK. This situation is escalating. In fact, in the UK already, they've started warning that the food banks are going to start downsizing the packages that they give to people that are hungry. So this is no longer just a situation where we can see problems on the horizon and we can imagine food prices rising. No, we're already at massive increases to the food prices, even by the UN FAO's own analysis. And of course, when you go to the supermarket, you can experience it there yourself. You feel it. And yet this is only the very beginning. We're now looking at a situation where people that can't afford to feed their families will be getting shrinking rations from the food banks. So I think this is something that bears a conversation today, and that's what I want to talk about. I'm Christian, and this is the Ice Age Farmer broadcast. And indeed, it's being reported by Bloomberg's chief energy correspondent that as China is having rolling blackouts and problems with their energy supply, Beijing actually took the, I would say, short-sighted step of telling some of their food processing plants, just don't turn off, stop crushing the soybeans. We'll figure out how to feed the animals later and the people later. Just keep the lights on right now. This is the same sort of a short-sighted decision-making that we saw when Taiwan was having water shortages and said, just shut down the farms. We're going to route that water to the semiconductor factories instead so we can keep churning out the iPhones. It's the kind of analysis and decision-making that only the technocracy could. It just doesn't make sense for people living in these areas to stop growing food. What do we need every day? And the only answer, it's not iPhones, it's food. Unless you're worried about vaccine passport rollouts. In that case, you would forget the food and focus on the iPhones. And that is, time after time, exactly what these people are doing. Plus, this is not just short-sighted decision-making. I should clarify, this is, in fact, a deliberately engineered attack on our food supply, an attempt to engineer food shortages and to take total control over the food supply. We'll talk about that in a bit. And I'll also talk about why this is not doom and gloom. In fact, what we're seeing here is a confluence of things that will actually get people awake, that is actually going to finally deliver enough pain via the wallet or the shortages of food to get people ready to be thinking creatively about how to respond to the challenges instead of just enduring the constant insults by the system. That people are going to finally be awoken from their slumber, and some of the conversations that you and I are having about self-sufficient homesteads and forming resilient communities are going to really hit home for people because they're seeing that the system at large is crumbling. And so that's the good news. All of this can be taken as good news when you realize that these systems were working against us from the get-go anyway. They are systems of enslavement, and we're hitting a critical point right now where the enslavement is not complete. It is not yet perfect, but people are waking up. So before we get any further into some of the data today, I just wanted to make sure that I clarify this is not doom and gloom, be afraid of all that we're talking about. And on the contrary, these are signs that our time is come, that these ideas are ready to grow to fruition. And so indeed, in China, from Bloomberg, pretty clear headlines here, world food costs are at risk of soaring even further as China faces a tough harvest due to the power shortages that have been afflicting them lately. Quote, China is set for a difficult harvest season as a severe energy crunch hurts the outlook for booming production, a development that risks triggering a renewed surge. Never mind that we're already at decadal highs for food prices in world agriculture and food prices. Autumn harvest in the top agricultural producer is underway, the number one, as the world's number two economy faces power shortages in industrial hubs that are slowing growth. Among the worst hit, of course, naturally, are the northeastern provinces as Jilin, Liaoning, and Heilongjiang, where about half of China's corn and soybeans are grown. Again, we're already at really low levels of corn and soybeans. China has already been hoovering them up from anywhere in the world that would sell them to them at record levels over the past 18 months now. And lo and behold, here comes yet another blow to their harvest of corn and soybeans. If you ask me, they already had bad yields this year. We've seen a few different flooding events that have affected corn and soybean yields there anyway, and this may just be a way of shifting the blame to the energy markets and make it a crisis that we have caused rather than the natural cycles of climate. But whatever the case, it is clearly going on that they don't have any energy. So here, a couple days later, global food prices may soar again on the Chinese energy crunch. It's also mirrored in Europe and elsewhere, and that's why this video today is talking about why this is escalating from regional energy problems into a worldwide energy and food crisis. The shortages are unleashing turmoil in the global commodities markets, fueling rallies in everything from fertilizer, because they shut down the factories, to silicon. Without power, China will struggle to handle crops from corn to soy to peanuts to cotton, testing Beijing's plans to boost the nation's agricultural production and guaranteeing food supplies for its 1.4 billion people. In other words, that's at risk now. China is having problems keeping those people fed. Quote, this is going to affect the supply and prices of ag products, which is a matter of importance for the national economy and indeed for people's livelihoods. Yes, several plants were forced to shut down or reduce output to conserve electricity, such as, for example, soybean processors that crush beans to produce meal for animal feed and oil for cooking. And of course, if you've been watching this channel, you're already aware that China's been having trouble feeding their massive number of animals, which in turn feed their people. So here from AgWeb, recently China's wheat imports were hitting a highest in 2 decades, signaling strong demand for animal feed. Part of the reason they started importing wheat was because they reformulated after they were having shortages of corn and soy. So you can see that these problems aren't resolving. All right, we shifted over to wheat and started hoovering that up, but even as a stopgap measure, now we don't have corn and soybeans coming out because the harvest is failing. So there is no light at the end of the tunnel for the Chinese production. Neither is there in Europe. So let's look at the UK, where yesterday the military was finally called in to resolve the fuel shortage, which is being attributed to the lack of lorry drivers, of HGV drivers. And so the army went out there with their gas, but it may be too little too late. And not only that, the prices of energy commodities are still rising. Yesterday, Algeria announced that they'll be shutting down yet another pipeline heading into Spain. So this is not a blip on the spot price that's going to come back down. In fact, you can see some of the charts. And again, what I wanted to highlight here, quote, it is smaller European meat suppliers. It's not the big ag companies, right? It's not huge multinational corporations that are being affected. I mean, of course they're affected, but they're not the ones that are going to go out of business, which would be a great thing. And we could go back to a distributed, decentralized, grassroots style food supply where you just buy from your neighbor or the rancher down the road, which is what we should all be doing anyway. No, it's that these smaller producers are being the most affected by the disrupted supplies of CO2 in Europe. So this is a perfect mechanism to shut down smaller producers and take even tighter control over that protein market. A lot of these things also, there's like I said, there's so much going on. The supply chain chaos is also escalating. We've seen now there's like 70 boats off the ports on the west coast of the U.S. It is effectively siege warfare, nothing coming in, nothing going out. And that is not showing any signs of letting up. Here from Zero Hedge, global supply chain crisis is going to last until 2023. No signs, again, no light at the end of the tunnel, just a cascading series of failures as things are getting worse and worse. Again, this is the data. This isn't the doom porn conclusion. I do think things are going to get better for humanity if we spread awareness of this data and use it to respond to it in intelligent ways. Again, return to decentralized production. Here's that article about 50%. I wanted to get back to the greenhouses in the Netherlands because, like I said, they are the number 2 exporter by value, not by volume, of food products in the world. And that produce that is grown in greenhouses there in the Netherlands, which are immense. That's 10,000 hectares, that's 25,000 acres. It's the size of Paris, equivalent in these indoor greenhouses, which are now being shut down. So here from Bloomberg, skyrocketing power prices are forcing the vast network of Dutch glasshouses, the continent's biggest, to go dark or scale back their operations, threatening to cut supplies at Europe's fruit and vegetable stalls. The Netherlands is the world's second largest exporter of food by value, thanks to these greenhouses, making the country one of Europe's key suppliers of fresh produce. So the meat industry is cutting down to 50%. We'll read down here that they've already started shutting down some of their production. Energy accounts for 30% of the costs for most of these greenhouse crops, and a large portion of the gas supplies are purchased at spot prices. In other words, they didn't buy it in advance so that they could weather a storm like this. They're buying it every moment to moment based on the current market prices, and when those market prices are going parabolic, they can't do it. Right? It ceases to be economically feasible to grow vegetables in greenhouses in the Netherlands. Go figure. But that's where our food supply for Europe is currently coming from. So here's one example that I think is important. A tomato grower that's producing about 40 million kilos, that's 80 million pounds, it's stunning, of tomatoes per year. Greenhouses are already turning off. The bulk of their harvest is raised indoors. Normally all the lights are used to sun the vines, but this year they're only running at 50% to 80%. So the meat is being scaled back by half. The vegetables is scaled back by 50 to 80%, but every day more. Eventually, we're going to produce less tomatoes and less vegetables. That's already starting now. Production is cut by about 10%. That may go to 20%. It may get even worse if the gas prices don't come, because they're still shutting down more gas lines. Eventually, customers are going to start paying more. Again, with food prices already at quite high levels, this doesn't bode well. Not to be outdone by the UK, the Netherlands is also working on shutting down their meat production. Here's an article from nrc.nl, which I'll translate here. You can see that the cabinet has created plans to just take farms away from people. So I had covered, I'll come back to this in a second, I had covered earlier this year, this is back in March, that the Netherlands had started purchasing to the tune of, here it is, of $700,000 each, pig rights from farmers. Which means once you take this lump sum payment, you will no longer be able to farm pigs. You've sold your pig rights. Now, I made the case in this video, and I still maintain that you can't sell pig rights. This is an innate right that we have to produce our own food. But they have apparently moved on from that in the Netherlands. Anyway, I guess they bought up the pig rights from all the farmers who were willing to take that bribe, and now they've moved on to just take it away. In fact, they even say down here, these new plans point to a rigorously different approach in which coercion is no longer taboo. And that is a key phrase here. I spoke with Dr. Frédéric Legras about how the UN World Food Systems Summit had a series of escalating steps where we'll raise taxes, we'll make it a social taboo to eat meat akin to smoking, and then they would gradually increase these policy decisions and ratchet up the tension to get rid of meat altogether. And you can see that now. They've already escalated to just take away the pigs, just shut them down. It's coercion. It's no longer taboo. We tried to buy them out 6 months ago, and those that didn't, forget it. Now it's just illegal. Now we're going to come take your farms from you. So this is stunning, the escalation of how the world food supply is being shut down deliberately by governments. And the Netherlands is not alone in doing this. In Ireland, their 2020 annual review, created by their Climate Change Advisory Council, said in no uncertain terms, the council, quote, "The council reiterates its view, the total number of cattle exceeds a sustainable level. We have too many cows in Ireland. We got to shut them down." The sustainable level of numbers is not static. It may increase if we have technology innovations, but it also may decrease as a result of lower carrying capacity due to climate change. So if climate change keeps happening, we'll have to kill off more of our cows. It is stunning the extent to which they are telegraphing their plans to shut down meat and acting on them rapidly. But they told us that, right? They told us this was the decade of change, a rapid series of things leading up to 2030, where they will reinvent the world food supply, transform from farm to fork everything that we know about where we get food and from whom. And it will be big corporations, in their view, that come out ahead. I mentioned there have been some cyber attacks. These are not at the same scale as the energy crises in terms of impact to our food supply, but it is worth noting that Klaus Schwab's cyber pandemic has started to meet up with these engineered food shortages. And this is the best way of understanding it is just yet another throttle on the food supply. So through the supply chains, through the fertilizer shortages and the energy crisis, they can literally dial in energy prices wherever they want to dictate and watch how the system responds, how many farmers sell out their rights, how many people shut down their operations versus try and figure out how to handle it, and use all of this data as a near perfect throttle on food production. F. William Ingdahl, who wrote Seeds of Destruction, one of the first great books about the use of our food supply as a vector for attacking the population, has come out a couple days ago with this new piece, Farm to Fork, How the EU and the Davos Cabal Plan to Control Agriculture. And he goes through a lot of fantastic data. Most of it we've looked at in this channel in the past, but it still bears repeating. That is what's going on here. Quote, we need to redesign, this is from them, our food systems, which today account for nearly a third of global greenhouse gases. So yeah, it's the cow farts, blame global warming, we can't do farming and ranching anymore. You have to eat fake lab meat now. That's the whole line that they're using right now. It consumes natural resources to farm. We're losing biodiversity loss, and it's not good for people. All of these things. These are UN SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, right? They just enumerate them to make it clear. They're saying, hey, this is our agenda here. What's the solution to this? Quote, new technologies and scientific discoveries combined with increasing public awareness and demand for sustainable food will benefit all stakeholders. And that means the lab-grown meat, all of these things. How are they going to do it? Well, they're going to force farmers to go bankrupt by demanding new costly inputs like the energy, rising ridiculously, like the fertilizer, stop the production of that, like the supply chain. You're not able to get your goods where you need them or your inputs when you need them. And radical new genetic manipulated patent plants with unproven safety. And indeed, that is another thing that's going into overdrive right now. We just read a few days ago that the UK is going to be relaxing their rules on GMO crops. In other words, they're going to say you can do it now. The article described how they used to be a $10,000 trial, but they're just waiving that now. And pretty soon you'll be able to introduce GMO crops just as you are with any other heirloom variety. It's just disgusting how they're defiling our food supply. And that is not going to stop. We've spoken in the past about the use of food vaccines, and indeed here from the Jerusalem Post of all places, UC Riverside scientists think that you can grow COVID-19 vaccine lettuce. We're gonna figure out how to do this and hopefully even give it to people to grow in their gardens, so you can grow entire fields of COVID-19 vaccines and eat it. And of course, Bill and Melinda Gates only a few days ago also announced another near $1 billion over the next 5 years to address global nutrition. It is as if they see these food crises, or they have perhaps planned these food crises, along with, for example, George Soros and John Podesta, who ran the food chain reaction game back in 2005, which foresaw this food crisis and the need for meat taxes and carbon taxes to get and of course a global government to make sure that pesky nationalists didn't cut off their exports and exacerbate future crises, which is the exact, of course, more globalization, the exact opposite of the real solution, which is to reverse this trend, to decentralize. We don't want to fail forward into even more technology and even more centralized control. No, we need to go back to where we're all growing our own food. And where I have one variety and my neighbor has another variety, and maybe mine didn't make it, but that's fine because his did, and we'll work together like humans always have. And as I said at the top, this isn't all bad news. I think there's good news in here, and that is that people are going to be experiencing a tremendous amount of pain over the coming months with these energy prices, especially if the lights go off in Europe during a cold winter, if the shelves are empty. People are going to be willing to listen to you and hear ideas that they would not have been receptive to before. Moving into communities, growing food yourself. This was totally unattractive to some people. It just wasn't on their radar last year. And I assure you, many people are now fertile ground, so to speak, for these kinds of ideas. They see the system failing. They're experiencing the increased costs. They're going to have pain in front of them. And it is now that we need to take all the stuff we've talked about for the last few years, the indoor growing, aquaponics, whatever it is that you have been employing your own tools and skills. You've seen the interviews with Marjorie Wildcraft about how to grow a lot of food in a small amount of space. We've talked to Gabe Brown about regenerative practices and soil health. We spoke at length about permaculture practices and how to cycle nutrients through your homestead to make sure you create abundance wherever you are and feed your family and not be dependent on these power grids and on these faltering supply chains. And those are the ideas that we need to be, not just practicing, but preaching right now. And of course, if you're practicing them, then that's probably the best way to preach it, because they're going to see you. They're going to see that you still have food, that you're warm over there because you've got your alpaca blankets, whatever it is that you're doing. And they're going to say, wow, that's a lot better than sitting alone in an apartment without food or heat. Maybe I should be doing that too, right? So it's really a coming of age for some of these ideas right now. Do not look at this data, at this headlines, and get sucked into fear. It doesn't help. You're stuck there. You can't get blood to the rest of your brain when you're stuck in your brain stem, right? We've all heard these things, and it's true. And so this has never been a broadcast to spread fear. It is spreading awareness of the challenges, which even to this day, I don't think enough people are talking about the food supply, which is the main vector of attack that these elites have planned to take total control. It's not about fearing that. It's about identifying that as a weakness for most people and then fixing that and getting back to a point where they will not be able to corner humanity by turning off the power, turning off the food. No, it's not going to happen. There are too many of us that see what's going on and are taking steps to make sure that we are positioned to endure it. And in fact, there is a rising tide. Here's another thing which I hope gives you some hope in what's going on right now. Even some of the people at the top of the UN Food Systems Summit have been expressing some concerns, like, this isn't really what we thought it was going to be. This isn't a people's summit. This is the same multinational agricultural companies. Here's one. Let's read. Quote, "Did the first UN Food Systems Summit give corporations too much of a voice? It was supposed to be a people's summit. It was branded as a people's summit because it brought together representatives from all over the world. But as it turns out, these big corporate shareholders had an outsized degree of influence." And here again, here's one of the UN's special rapporteur on the right to food, Michael Fakhri, actually came out and said, this is not it, man. No one has been talking about how we got here because of the problems of these big companies. No one talked about who should be held accountable for that mess. Anybody said was, we all need to be a part of the solution, but that casts such a wide, undiscerning net that it means the same people, Pepsi, Barilla, right, the same multinational companies are making the decisions, are failing forward into them taking even more control. So when even, ladies and gentlemen, when even the people who are running the World Food Systems Summit at the United Nations are saying, whoa, this is too much. This was supposed to be how we fix the food systems, not how we take even more control into corporations, then you know the tide is turning. The dam is breaking on sentiment for how this is, and the awareness is rising. So as I've said, more now than ever is the time to practice and preach these ideas of self-sufficiency, of building abundance through communities. Join me in doing that. It's the time right now to take this back over. I think you'll find people are more willing to listen than ever before. Even people that would have thought you were a crackpot, 6 months ago, are coming around right now. So have those conversations, please. Ladies and gentlemen, you can find this report on iceagefarmer.com. As I've mentioned before, the YouTube channel is gone now. I've kept it up there with some of the interviews like Marjorie and Gabe Brown that I just mentioned because I want those resources to be available for people to find and use. But all of the video reports are stripped out. Those are only now visible at iceagefarmer.com or on bitchute.com/iceagefarmer or odyssey.com/@iceagefarmer. And the main place that I'm broadcasting these days is on Telegram, despite a very annoying number of bots on there, which is happening to all channels. That is t.me/iceagefarmer, and a lot of data coming across that wire. So I hope to see you there. All right, thanks for watching, and I hope you're well, and I hope you're going to stay well fed and warm throughout the winter ahead of us. Be well.